us again today. Today we are on location in Sedona, Arizona, at a very beautiful place at the Sedona Institute. And we are seated with the founder of the Sedona Institute, Hale Dwoskin, who is the author of this book, The Sedona Method, which is the carrying forward of the work of a wonderful physicist and engineer, Lester Levinson from New York City, who has a really interesting legacy that Hale is carrying forward, as I said. And it has a lot to do with a very simple, very natural, you could even say organic process of letting go. And Hale will be speaking with us about this process and the effects it's been having on people for many, many years at this point, and how it's beginning to spread across the world. So, Hale, great to have you.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. It's a beautiful place to be letting go.
I think any spot is a good place to let go.
Yes, I think you're right. But if you could be surrounded by red rocks, why not do it?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's part of the reason we have our retreats here. We have people at least 4 times or more a year come from all over the world to do our courses here. Generally, there's no less than 10 countries represented.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Wow. Now, what goes on in these retreats?
Well, what we do in our retreats is we cover some of the basics of the Sedona method, but the main thing we focus on is helping people discover their essential essence, their true nature, that which is here now and it always has been here now. And we do that experientially, so that what happens is, as you explore the work that we do, you drop your sense of separation. You drop your belief that there's a you separate from me, and there's a you separate from everything else.
I know. I like the shirt I'm now wearing. The blue shirt.
Right. Well, I know that sounds funny. No, please play away. There's obviously a diversity of forms, but that which you are is formless.
Yes, exactly.
It allows for all forms. You couldn't have forms without it. But at the same time, it's not confined to or limited to any specific form, but it is the essence.
That's where we get caught.
Yes, that's a big misconception. A lot of us believe also that if we discover the truth of who we are, then we instantly become psychic, and we know what everyone else is thinking and feeling, and if we don't, then we must not be recognizing our true nature. And that isn't true.
Or we cease to exist.
Oh, yeah, that's another big thing.
Yeah.
But both are lies that perpetuated by people who either didn't know from direct experience or were wanting to have followers. The just knowing the truth of who you are is a radical difference in the way you experience life, except nothing changes at all. You already are that which you're seeking. And a lot of us are afraid that first of all, we believe that we have to have some sort of power or city or some magical powers just because we know who we are. And 99.9% of the people who recognize their true nature never have anything unusual happen around them. What happens is just an end of suffering, which, by the way, is enough.
Just that.
Just that. But there is also this misconception. We believe that if we discover that there is no separate individual, that something's going to disappear. But it can only disappear if it was here to begin with. What you do as you do our work is you discover that that separate individual isn't even real. So as that illusion...
As we conceive it. As we conceive it.
Period. Yes. Well, as we conceive it, of course.
In that we have a name, we have an ego, we have a personality, we have all these features that we keep referring to as us. But there's another us, if you will, underneath.
But I go, but I agree, but I'd take that a step deeper.
I'm stating it, but I'm also asking. So
yes, okay, great. So, yes and no.
Go further, sure.
No. What I found is that this belief in the ego is just further suffering. Because then what we do is we try to work on the ego, we try to fix it, and then after a while we try to get rid of it, never examining to see if it's actually here. So
if it's actually real.
If it's actually real. Well, check.
It's an idea.
It's exactly. Yeah. It's exactly. Right now.
I can't find it.
Right. And no one ever has.
Yeah.
I've done this with thousands of people. I say, okay, show me this me that you think you are. Right. Well, yes, one of the things is, well, what about this? And I say, yes, of course. There is this body, but check. Are you that body, or are you that which is aware of the body?
Right.
And as soon as the people, well, obviously I'm that which is aware of the body. I'm not the actual
Body.
flesh and bones.
Right.
And at the same time, that life that we are, that awareness that we are, without that, there would be no body. It would be just meat.
That's right. Exactly.
There'd be you wouldn't be seeing through those eyes. You wouldn't be hearing through those ears.
Yeah.
So that presence of awareness has no form, has no shape, has no time. It's not involved. It's not actively involved in anything that's appearing. But at the same time, nothing could appear without it.
Right. Exactly. It's sort of everything is as a result of it, but is not it.
Right.
But a function of it.
Right. Or an appearance in or on it.
Or
is another,
right.
Yeah, it's another way of saying.
Could you just, to go back, Hale, just kind of go back and give a little bit of an anatomy of the release technique and the Sedona method itself?
Oh,
and how
sure.
This works
Sure.
as it comes from Lester?
Right. Well, let me just say a few words first to honor Lester.
Yes.
Lester Levinson was a physicist engineer, as you know, who back in 1952 was sent home to die from a second coronary. But rather than give up, he decided to go back to the lab within himself. And in that process, he made a series of discoveries about himself. And the first was that we all have no limits except the ones we impose on ourselves, and those limits could be let go of. And once he discovered that, he started actively letting go of this inner sense of limitation, or another way of saying that, he started seeing through these imaginary limitations. And
They saw that they were also self-imposed.
Totally self-imposed, and at the same time, they weren't real, because they could be, if they were real, then you couldn't let them go. It's like, my hand, if I try, if I don't have a knife, I can't let go of my hand.
Yes.
But the truth is that which we are is resting. It's like this. I can let go of these glasses,
Right.
obviously,
Yes.
because they're not attached to me. But most of us live our lives believing that our ego is attached. Our beliefs are attached. Our thoughts are attached. Our memory is attached. But all of it is resting on or appearing by virtue of that which we are.
Yes.
So Lester discovered this within himself, and after just a few months, he discovered that beyond all sense of limitation was this peace that he was. And on discovering this, he lived another 42 years after the doctors basically sent him home with a death sentence.
You mean the doctors were wrong?
Fancy that. Well, honestly, they probably would have been right. If Lester hadn't done what he'd done with himself, they were just basing it on someone who had had a second massive coronary, and back then they really didn't have adequate ways of dealing with a coronary
according
artery
to their
disease.
belief system,
Yeah,
this is what pursues from
Exactly.
and proceeds from the state.
He was in such bad shape, they just assumed that he only had a few weeks to live. So, but he thought that was actually fortunate. It kind of shocked him into alertness and
Isn't it
checking to
interesting?
see what was true.
So it's sort of like fear, again, becomes a great teacher. And it, in a sense, jettisons people into a certain kind of awareness, perhaps even action.
Well, it's not just fear. Any extreme circumstance or any extreme emotion can sometimes break through our hypnosis. So any extremity can. But at the same time, because it's just hypnosis, the extremity isn't required. There are many people who discover the truth of who they are quite by accident, or they do it from following some sort of organized investigative process, like the Sedona method is. Because most of us are so stubborn, we need a whack on the side of the head before we're willing to see through some of the illusions that we've hold really dear to ourselves.
So
Yeah.
I remember in a radio show describing you as a little Buddha. And now I'm remembering why. But I get to see the Buddha in person now. So.
That's very sweet.
Yeah, right. Well, no, it's got,
I even have the belly to go with that.
Prerequisite, you know?
I guess.
Very funny.
But anyway, so
Your words are really interesting, and what you're saying is the Sedona, what we have as the Sedona method is the process that Lester went through that ultimately saved his own life and doubled his lifespan.
well, yes and
And
no.
brought him to a state
the
of
essence
peace.
is, well, two things. First of
Yeah.
all, it uncovered the peace that he already was.
Right.
He didn't actually gain peace. Anything,
Right.
anything you can gain, you can
Uncover.
also lose,
Sure.
right? And by the way, that's also how you know that your mind isn't real, or and even your body. You lose it every night in deep sleep. Where is it? It's gone.
Yeah.
You reassociate with it every morning, but it's not there. Good 8 hours a day.
Rabbi Gelberman, I think I said this to you
Yeah.
yesterday, said, 97 years old, famous rabbi in the New York
Yeah.
area, said to me, and I interviewed him just after his 97th birthday,
Uh-huh.
he said, every night I die.
Right.
We all do.
Yes.
And the first thing I say when I wake up in the morning, thank God I came back.
Right.
Reassociating with his
Yes,
body.
no, it's true.
Yeah.
And the truth is that the illusion of me dies in between every thought because it's not here.
Right.
We just assume, we ignore the fact that in between every thought, there is the true essence of who we are. We usually calibrate ourselves to these individual thoughts and ignore everything else, or these individual sensations or
Exactly.
pictures.
It's just the inversion of, in a sense, what's truest.
Yes.
It's like the space between, the gap is where we are most ourselves.
Right.
And the thoughts are, in a sense, like you're saying, an addition, like the glasses or a pen.
Right, and they're not separate from the space. I mean, you couldn't have a thought without stillness.
It's samsara and nirvana, right?
That's right. They come together. This is very good. But anyway, so
Exactly.
the other thing you mentioned, though, is Lester's process. Honestly, I don't really know what Lester's process was. I knew Lester for 18 years, and I heard him describe it differently every time he talked about it.
Is that so?
Yes. So what his actual process was, and it definitely wasn't the Sedona method, actually, because the Sedona method itself was a process that was a distillation of how he'd been teaching for 20 years. He discovered the truth of who he was in 1952. It wasn't until around 1972 that the Sedona method was formulated.
I see.
So there were 20 years of experimentation to try to find what worked the best.
Ah.
So whether he actually used it, it certainly
Right.
didn't use it in the form it is now, guaranteed.
Right,
He also didn't use it in the form that I inherited. Before Lester died, he passed on all his copyrights to me. And he, at the time, there was one way of letting go, simply deciding to drop it. But he said to me, this isn't static. Allow yourself and your own creativity to keep seeing where it takes you, because I think you can discover faster, better, easier ways of letting go. And I took that to heart. And so now we actually teach 5 ways of letting go. There's the simplest one, the most basic, is deciding to drop it. But that's just one way. Another way of letting go is if you simply allow what is to be, if you welcome what is, that is also letting go. This is what letting go looks like. You just open and you let go. But this is what welcoming looks like. You go like this. It's the same thing. And then another way we teach
So
people.
you're allowing whatever feeling it is, fear, anxiety, sadness, grief, whatever, to just be present with you. That's the welcoming?
Yes. Well, you're
So you're consciously experiencing that which you are seeking to otherwise put away.
Partially, yes. That's a relatively accurate description, but even simpler than that, you're simply doing this inside. You're simply opening. That's it.
A feeling of opening and embracing.
Yeah, embracing, welcoming, allowing,
Okay.
being with, all of those are synonyms. And so that's
This
another.
is what we do in psychotherapy all the time. We invite people to feel the real feelings instead of dismiss them, deny them, suppress them.
True, except what I've noticed happens in most therapy is it isn't really gone to the level of welcoming. It's gone to the level of intellectual engagement or study or re-experiencing or analyzing. There's so many things that people do
Depends
under
on the therapist.
right, under the guise of
Yes.
true
Working with it
true
and letting go.
welcoming. True welcoming doesn't require any mental process. It's still. And there are very few therapists capable of communicating that because they're not still within themselves.
I was going to say, exactly. They must
Not
have
that
the experience
exactly,
first.
exactly. If you're inviting someone to stillness and you're noisy, they'll just be reinforcing noise. But anyway,
Exactly.
so
Please
there's
go
a
on.
third way of letting go is if you dive into the core of any emotion, what you discover there's nothing there. It's much ado about nothing. It's like if you poke a soap bubble and you put your finger into it, it pops. And that emptiness or space that's underneath becomes more self-obvious. And then the fourth way of letting go is something we call holistic.
It's like a big cosmic joke.
Yes.
Or is that the fifth way? I'm sorry.
Yes and yes.
Please go on.
Yes and yes. So the fourth way of letting go is if you look around at what you experience, the only way the mind knows how to experience life is through duality. They're mutually supportive and or sometimes conflicting opposites is all the mind can see. The simple ones are like we're inside a room. But the only way we know we're inside a room because there's also outside the room. We're sitting here. Well, we know we're sitting here because we're not sitting there.
It's a relative statement.
They're all relative, and they arise together. You can't have in without out, here without there.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that we do that in our mental world too, and there's no problem with that. I mean, you need it for knowing where to put the body.
Exactly.
If you're going to say sit in this chair, you have to
that chair.
not
right.
that chair. You have to know what someone's referring to.
In a sense, we know the world in some way by what it isn't.
Exactly.
We know our position by.
Yes, exactly. So, but where it causes suffering is internally. We have all these things, these states of mind, the states of being, and also these internal goals about the external world that we think we're going to suffer unless it is a particular way, or there are certain emotions or certain perspectives that we don't like. So if you have some things you don't like, you also have things you like. And what we do with the things we don't like is we resist them. And because we're pushing against them, resisting them, we feed them and keep them alive. We actually hold them close. And the things that we do like, we try to hold on to them. But what people have discovered is that when you try to hold on to what you love, it simply slips away. So what I discovered by happenstance, actually, working with someone, is that when you embrace both sides of any of these equations, if, say, you're angry at someone, if you also embrace whatever acceptance or love you have for the person, and you go back and forth a couple of times, they dissolve each other. It's like bringing matter and antimatter together,
Yes.
a positive or negative charge. They simply disappear. And what you're left with is that knowingness or this relaxation or beingness or presence that you already are. So that's the fourth way of letting go. And then the fifth way of letting go,
It's a neutralizing.
Yes, it totally neutralizes. And it's a neutralizing and a dissolving. What you actually feel internally as you do it, most often is you feel a sense of something unraveling or dissolving or slipping away. And then the fifth way of letting go is the most recent one we developed about. It actually have developed over, I think it's now about 5 years. The first time I did it with someone, the perspective that the fifth way is based on is something that I've lived for many years. But the actual way of working with people that way, I started
the technique, so to speak.
Technique, so to speak,
Yeah.
yes. Started about 5 years ago in a seminar where I just did it with 2 people on the seminar. There were 100 people there, and I only did it with 2 of them. But by the next seminar, I was doing it with everybody. And then I've been refining it and perfecting it ever since. And the fifth way is based on recognizing just 2 things. One is that essence or presence or beingness that you are already is. It's already here and it's already now. You don't have to go looking for it.
Right.
If I simply ask you are you? What responds is what you are. I don't even have to say what are you, just simply are you.
And in fact, there doesn't even have to be a verbal response.
No, often the verbal response is just a distraction.
Right.
And
it's an afterthought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there are various ways to help people to get in touch with that awareness or presence that they are. And a lot of teachers do that. And the problem, if you just do that and you don't also recognize what you're not, then it's easy to get re-caught up in the drama.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that we help people see is that if you check in this moment, this me that you think you are, there's certainly memory, there's certainly projection, there's certainly experiencing, all that's happening, but it's not happening to anyone. But you don't, again, we don't ask you to believe it. We help people see it from their own direct experience, so that it becomes experiential. Just like that film clip I showed you yesterday. That's one of the ways we help people just simply look to see what's actually here now. And in doing that, you discover that there is no separation. There is no one here that's separate.
It
now,
sounds very Advaita-ist.
It's very Advaita-ist. Lester introduced me to the Sedona method in 1976. And early 1977, he started recommending other things to explore. And the first teacher he exposed me to was Ramana Maharshi.
Yes.
Lester was a big Advaita fan. He thought that the Advaita teachings, the non-dual teachings from the East, were the closest teachings to his teachings that he knew of. So I've always embraced them. And in fact, when I was Lester's caregiver for a couple years before he died, and one of the things he didn't know about Nisargadatta, because Nisargadatta came later. And so I used to use Nisargadatta's book, I Am That, as for his bedtime reading. So once he found out about Nisargadatta, he loved it so much. When he was falling asleep at night, I used to read to him from Nisargadatta. Beautiful. And he loved that.
It's a great image. I love that, you know. What I love about this whole tradition, if you will, Hale, is that Lester, Jewish guy from New York, scientist, came up with the teachings that are of antiquity from another part of the world, and usually credited with the wisdom to have that kind of generation right here without having any formal background in that kind of teaching or wisdom training. But it just, in a sense, spontaneously arose through his own mentation and experience.
No, it did. It did. And
I think that's really a symbol for us all about what's possible.
Well, one of the things that I really, when I met Lester, one of the things that really attracted me to him is that he was not part of the guru-disciple tradition. I've met a lot of people in that tradition before, and especially for the Eastern mind, it's highly appropriate. But the Western mind really distorts it. They either surrender in a way that's non-discriminating, so they end up getting burned a lot by false teachers, although that happens in the East too, but even more in the West. Or they resist that surrender, not understanding what it's really about. So Lester took himself out of the equation. One of the things that I do, that Lester did, that all the people who teach the Sedona method do, is they make sure that people are clear that it's not about them. It has nothing to do with their persona, it has nothing to do with their body, their mind, any of it. It's simply something that's happening spontaneously in service to what that person is looking to achieve within themselves.
The footage I've seen of you, and I have seen some with Jack Canfield and a few other places, that's been very evident. I'd like to ask you, we have so few minutes left, but I'd like to, because you've been so close to Lester and you're the main promulgator of these teachings for some time now. Inside yourself, do you feel that you have come to that place of no suffering, of that kind of equanimity?
But I don't feel like I've come to it.
Okay, that was just my language.
No. But the reason I correct it's I don't really care what words are just sounds. I don't really care which words he used.
Okay.
But it's important for everyone to know that it's not something you gain. It's not something you come to. It's something that's always been here.
It's always been
Always
there.
been
And
now.
do you feel then that you have released and relaxed enough into the stream of consciousness in which you would say that you are free of suffering?
I don't know. No, actually, I
But
wouldn't
is
say it
that-
even that way. I
Okay,
would simply
please say it how you would see it.
that I am clear that what I am is what I am, and it's also what you are, and there is no suffering in that, none. And the releasing certainly tremendously supported that, but it wasn't a straight line.
Right. I'm sure of that.
What I find about releasing in the Sedona method is that the Buddhists talk about this. They say all practices that the discovery of the truth of who you are is an accident. It's spontaneous. It's an act of grace.
Yes.
But the best a practice can do, any practice, is make you more accident prone. And in my experience, there's no teaching I'm aware of on the planet that makes you more accident prone.
Well, thank you for helping to promote accidents.
Right. Fortunate accidents.
Exactly. Thank you truly for your work and your commitment.
Thank you. Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's really powerful for the world.
Yes, thank you.
This is Mitchell J. Rabin with Hale Dwoskin in Sedona, and very glad you joined us. And what is your website?
Sedona.com, just like the city.
There we go. Okay, very good. You're growing by the. That's fabulous. Soon you'll be a country. So this is Mitchell J. Rabin. Thanks so much for joining us. And